Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to share with you the new Anastasia Prism eyeshadow palette. I'm going to be going over swatches of all the shades and the formula, also comparing it to the Subculture palette. I'm going to show you guys some shade comparisons and definitely get into how the formula of the new Prism palette compares to the Subculture palette. So if you guys are interested in finding out more about the Prism palette, then just keep on watching. Alright, so the Anastasia Prism palette was just released on the Anastasia website. It is currently out of stock. It will be restocked very soon and it will be available at Sephora online and in stores later in October. It is a limited edition palette, unlike the Subculture and the Modern Renaissance. This is limited edition just for the holiday season. I'm not sure how long that will be, but just keep that in mind that it's probably just going to be a couple months that this palette is available if you guys do want to pick it up. It is the same price as the Modern Renaissance and the Subculture palette. It is $42, has just as many shadows. It has 14 shadows and 0.28 ounces, just like the other palettes. So you get just as much product for the same price. In this palette, you're getting 7 matte shades, 5 shimmer metallic shades, and 2 duochrome shadows. If you guys take a look at the Subculture palette, the color scheme is very similar. They're both very like darker shades, a lot of colorful shades. There's a lot of more like cool tone shades in both palettes. This one does range a bit more warm, but you do get cool tones in both of them. And the Subculture palette has way more mattes in here. There are 11 mattes in here, 2 duochromes and 1 shimmer. So this is way more matte compared to this one. You only get 5 mattes in this palette. So that's something to keep in mind if you guys prefer more matte shadow looks or shimmer shadows. You get a lot more mattes in here compared to this one. I'm going to get into the formula and everything and shade comparisons in a little bit, but I do want to go through all the shadows, let you guys know my thoughts about them. I have applied all of them on my eyes and I do have thoughts about every single shade. I'm wearing about half the shades on my eyes today. And if you guys are curious about my makeup today using the new palette and a couple new products from Anastasia, that will be up on my Instagram. Once it's up there, I will link it down below. But before we get into that, I'm going to go ahead and swatch all of the shades. I'm going to start off with the first shade, which is Lucid, which is a duochrome. This is kind of like in my inner corner today. And this is a white gold with pink reflect. So with that, this is basically like a shadow topper. So it does transform any eyeshadow color, but you're not going to get full on color payoff with this shade on its own. The next shade we have is Eden. This is a matte coral pink shade, and this is pretty pigmented. And this is kind of like the lightest transition shade in the palette. The next shade is Unity. This is a matte nude ochre. This is a very light color. It has more of like a yellow undertone to it. And on me, I can set my whole eye with this color. But if you have like a lighter skin tone, it's going to show up pretty yellow on your eyes. And then next we have Sphinx. This is the first metallic shade and it's so pigmented when it swatches. It's gorgeous. This is on my lower lash line. This is a metallic warm bronze. I'm going to use this shade up. It's so beautiful and so pigmented. The metallics in here are very wet and foiled. They're going to apply really nicely with your fingertips or a wet brush, but even on their own, you're still going to get that color payoff because they're very creamy and very like almost a wet formula. So next we have the shade Osiris, and this is a metallic midnight violet with red reflect. This is a shimmer shade, but it is slightly drier than some of the other shimmers, so it's not going to show up super pigmented on its own. You probably want to use a wet brush with it. It is pretty pigmented, but the other ones feel a lot more creamier. This one has a little bit more of a chunky glitter to it. Then we have the shade Spear. This is a matte electric yellow green, and this is a pretty sheer shade. I applied this all over my lid, and you definitely want to use like a white eye base to get like a full pigmentation, get like a really neon look. Otherwise it's going to be really washed out. Like you guys can see, you can still see my skin through this shade. Next, the shade Obsidian is a deep matte black. This is a very pigmented black shade, and it actually does show up black and not like a grayish tone. When you apply this on the eye, what I really like about it is that there's not like mega fallout when you go to apply it. It doesn't get really messy. It actually stays in place. So that is like a huge difference between this palette and Subculture, especially with the mattes. You're not going to get a lot of intense fallout. Anytime that I've done my eye makeup, like a very dramatic eye look with this palette, including today, I apply my foundation and everything at first and it doesn't fall out like crazy. So that's definitely something to keep in mind with this palette, that you're not going to get like super intense fallout with it. Next dimension is the NYX Duochrome, but it's very different from Lucid in the formula because it actually shows up pigmented and you don't need like a base with it. And this is a silver gray with pink reflex. So it does show up pretty pigmented on its own like some of the other metallics. It's not like a sheer shade that's a shadow topper. It's a really pigmented shadow. Then we have Parallel, which is a matte truffle shade. It's a dark brown that has kind of like a purpley undertone to it. So it's not just a pure brown. It does have more of like an eggplant color to it. Then one of my favorite shades in here is Pyramid. It's so pretty. It's a metallic yellow gold with a green reflect. And I applied this, I had this on my eye in one of my recent videos. And I normally don't go for like a greenish gold. Sometimes it can look a little bit off on me, but this is very much a true gold, but it's so foiled and metallic that it doesn't, the green isn't unflattering with this shade. Then probably my favorite shade in this palette is Throne, which is what's on my lid today. It's so beautifully foiled. And this is a metallic blackened blue-green with a multicolor reflex. So you guys can see, like, depending on the light, you're gonna get a different shade. And that's what I really like about it, that it's blue and green. It has a lot of dimension to it. Sometimes just a green on my lid can look like really like stark or flat. So I like that there's a lot of color going on with this shade, and it makes it very wearable because you can blend it with different colors. And then next we have Saturn. Saturn is a matte terracotta. That's what I mostly have in my crease today as like my transition shade. This is the next like deeper matte in this palette. This is basically going to be your transition shade, this and Eden. So you're really just getting like those really orangey reddish tones for transition shades. Then we have Eternal, and this is a metallic violet copper. This is also a very like wet, creamy shimmer shade that's going to apply really nicely on your lid. And then lastly, we have Lure, which is a matte ashy lilac color. So this is like a grayish purple tone. This is also like a good transition shade, but it's super cool tone, which is like not my favorite shade on me, but if you guys do like cool tones, that is like a really nice staple transition shade. So these are all 14 shades in the palette, and I feel like when you see them swatched, they're a little bit less intimidating compared to seeing like all of the colorful shades in the pan. I feel like you could pinpoint more of the neutral colors or more of like the wearable shades when you see them swatched. At least that's what I get whenever I see it swatched compared to the actual palette. And most of them do swatch pretty true to pan. They are pretty pigmented. The mattes look a little bit more sheer. I think that they are more buildable mattes compared to like really creamy, intensely pigmented. So compared to the mattes in the Subculture palette, they don't swatch as pigmented. Like those swatch like a full like coat of paint, basically. Like they're super opaque. These don't swatch as pigmented, but they apply so much easier because you're not getting like crazy fallout. With the Subculture palette, I'd go to apply it on my eye and it'll just end up like on my carpet, all over my body, and not actually on my eye. So these are a lot more blendable, a lot easier to blend. They are still powdery. They're not Subculture powdery where I go to dip in my brush and this happens. But they're still powdery, but they're not going to be like crazy powdery where you're losing a lot of product and you're getting a ton of fallout on your face. With the matte shades, I have yet to find that any of them really give me like a lot of fallout on my face. With some of the shimmers, they do give me a little bit of fallout. When I was going to apply Throne today with both my finger and a brush, I was getting some fallout. And also with Osiris and Lucid, I would get some fallout as well because they do have some more glitter in them. So you get some more fallout with those. And then with Sphinx, Pyramid, and Eternal, like the bronzier gold shades, you're going to get very minimal fallout because it's like almost a wet formula. So I do think that the Prism palette is a bit easier to work with than the Subculture palette, a lot easier actually to work with than the Subculture palette. I did not have a good experience with the Subculture palette. I will leave my review of it in my description box, but I will let you guys know I do have the boxes of both the Subculture and the Prism palette. I compared the ingredients on the back of both of the packages. The shimmer shades in both palettes, all of them are completely different. Like they each have their own ingredient list, but the mattes in both palettes, they are the same ingredients. They have the same ingredient list, but of course I didn't create the formulas. I'm not a chemist. All I did was read the back of these two boxes and compare the ingredients. And the matte shades, the ingredients are the same. They have the same list of ingredients in the same order. So of course I don't know how much of each ingredient was in there, but that's just something to note. And all of the shimmer shades in both of the palettes are different. I do think that Norvina did say that these shadows are more firmly pressed, but they do feel that way as well, especially if they do have the same ingredients. They definitely don't feel the same. They don't have as much fallout compared to the Subculture palette. And then for the shimmers, there's really only one shimmer in the Subculture palette, which is Adorn. And it's basically the same formula as the shimmers in the Prism palette. But I told you guys in my review, like, I like this shade. I don't have any issue with it whatsoever. But then you do have two duochromes in the Subculture palette, Cube and Electric. And these are very like wet and chunky. They basically hit hard pan just in a couple times of using them. When you go to put your brush in, they get really like dirty and muddy really quickly. And I do find that the duochromes in the Prism palette are a lot better. Lucid is more chunky. It's less like a pressed packed shade. You do get a lot more fallout. It is more glittery, but I feel like for what it's supposed to be, it definitely works. You guys can see it on my eyes today, like in my inner corner and the inner third of my eye. It does do what it's supposed to do, which is kind of like a shadow transformer. And then Dimension is actually a really nice shade. I don't think of it as like a duochrome compared to Lucid. They're very different formulas. It's basically the same as some of the other shimmers where it applies really nicely. You do get like that silver and purple reflect, but it goes on really nicely and pigmented. So overall, the formula is way better compared to Subculture. If you guys are debating both of them, I would definitely get the Prism palette. I like the formula a lot better. And I'm also way more into shimmer compared to mattes, and the Subculture palette is mostly matte with 11 matte shades. So I do want to give you guys a couple comparisons if you already have the Subculture palette and you're debating getting this one. I'm going to give you some shade comparisons because you do get a lot of similar shades in both of the palettes. So I'm going to start off by comparing Cube from Subculture and Lucid, which are the two lighter duochrome shades. And on top here you have Cube and then you have Lucid. So this has more of a pink reflect from Subculture, and this has more of a goldish green reflect to it. And I just like the way that Lucid performs compared to Cube. Cube, I couldn't get to show up for the life of me. If I did an eye look like this, it would be very, very faint. And with Lucid, I feel like that does really pop on top of other shadows. So I do like the formula better. So they are different shades and the formula is better, I think, for the Prism palette. And these are a bit different. Unity is on top and Dawn is on the bottom. Dawn is a bit darker. It's more of a transition shade. And then Unity on me, I can set my eye with that. So they are a little bit different. You can use them in different ways. The next two shades are really similar. We have Roxy from Subculture and Eden from the Prism palette. Roxy is on the bottom and Eden is on the top. They're really similar. Roxy is just a little bit deeper and Eden is a little bit lighter, and it does have more of a pink tone to it, but they're really, really similar on the eye. They're going to show up the same. So that's definitely something to keep in mind because those are both like lighter transition shades in both palettes. And then we get kind of the same deal with Fudge and Parallel. Fudge from Subculture and Parallel and Prism. These are a little bit different. Fudge is more warm on top, and then Parallel has a little bit of that purple hint to it. But you guys can tell, like, if I were to apply this on my eyes, it's going to show up very, very similar. I have it in my inner or outer corner, I have Parallel, but you can't really see that purpliness to it. They're both going to apply like very dark brown. And then lastly, we have two really similar shimmer shades, Adorn from Subculture and Eternal from Prism. These look so similar. Adorn is on top, Eternal is on the bottom. Eternal has a little bit more of an orangey hint to it. They're going to look almost identical on the eye. So say if you were to go in with Roxy, Fudge, Dawn, and Adorn, like a really neutral orangey copper eye look, you're going to get that exact same look with Eden, Parallel, Unity, and Eternal. They're going to look really, really similar. So that's really where the similarities really lie, with more of the neutral tones. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you're buying either palette for like the colorful shades, you're going to get completely different eye looks, especially because you're getting so many metallic shades in this palette. I definitely recommend this palette over Subculture for lots of reasons, the formula especially, but also the shade selections. I definitely like the shades in here more. I feel like you can get a bit more creative with this palette. My hesitation with this palette is mostly that Eden and Saturn are the lightest shades that you can use for transition shades, or basically the only shades other than Lure for transition shades. So you're committing to like a really orangey look or a purple tone look. I do wish that they added in a warm brown, but Anastasia has always done a really colorful scheme in their palettes before Modern Renaissance, like their artist palette, their self-made palette. A lot of like their earlier palettes were very like colorful and almost more of like a supplementary palette. So I see this palette as something I'm going to use with my Modern Renaissance palette. I feel like they go together nicely. I have it pulled out here and you guys can see like my transition shades are like mostly used up in this palette because I love them so much. So this has like all of my neutrals, and if you guys already have this palette and you want to get this one, I feel like they would go really, really nicely together. I'm going to use all of these warm browns with all of these colorful shades because sometimes I don't want to commit to colorful transition shades and color on the lid and color on the lower lash line. So I would recommend it for the formula. I think you would have a issue with this palette if you're not into a lot of color, if you don't like palettes where you're gonna get every shade you need for like a neutral look, a colorful look. You might not like this palette because it is very colorful and you're kind of limited in the matte shades. So I don't think that you're limited in like the looks that you can create, but you do pretty much have to commit to colorful, bolder looks with this palette. It's definitely how you want to use the palette. If you want to use it on its own, just know it's really, really colorful. You're not going to get a lot of neutral looks, but if you want to use this to complement some other palettes or neutral palettes, I think you would really like this palette as well. Alright guys, so that's everything for today's video. Definitely let me know your thoughts about the Prism palette or how it compares to the Subculture palette just from seeing it, or if you've tried it already, in the comments down below. And if you guys are curious about my makeup today, it will be up on my Instagram and I'll link it in my description box once it's up on my Instagram, probably a couple hours after this video goes live. And all the information for all the palettes will be in my description box as well. And if you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you guys soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye. We go.